Hello, I'm Parneet Jaggi, and this is going to be a brief overview of the famous essay Reflections on Gandhi, written by George Orwell. To know a little bit about George Orwell, although we know him as a writer of Animal Farm, which has entertained the world in a symbolic form for the past several years, but let's know a little bit about George Orwell's life. Eric Arthur Blair, born in 1903, is actually known by his pen name George Orwell, and he was an English novelist, essayist, journalist, and critic. He is best known for his dystopian novel 1984 that was published in 1949, and also the satirical novella Animal Farm, published in 1945. Now, these two books have together sold more copies than any other two books by a 20th century author. So much so, his popularity can be measured by the fact that the Times magazine ranked Orwell second among the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. Now, what is this essay, Reflections on Gandhi, about? It was published in the Partisan Review in 1949, just a year after Gandhi was assassinated, and approximately 3 years after Indian independence. Now, here in this essay, Orwell takes up the question of the power of Gandhi's non-violence, the concept which is generally studied as a very popular and useful concept of non-violence, whether this is a method of political action, and he also looks at it, considers this in the context of India's process of decolonization. Now, the essay starts with a very general statement. Looking at Gandhi from different perspectives, he starts the essay with a statement about saints. So, he looks at Gandhi initially like he is being judged. Gandhi is being judged as a saint throughout the world. So, he says, saints should always be judged guilty until they are proved innocent, but the tests that have to be applied to them are not, of course, the same in all cases. In Gandhi's case, the questions one feels inclined to ask are: to what extent was Gandhi moved by vanity, by the consciousness of himself as a humble, naked old man sitting on a praying mat and shaking empires by sheer spiritual power? And to what extent did he compromise his own principles by entering politics, which of their nature are inseparable from coercion and fraud? To give a definite answer, one would have to study Gandhi's acts and writings in immense detail, for his whole life was a sort of a pilgrimage in which every act was significant. Now we see this particular passage has been taken from the first passage of the essay Reflections on Gandhi. Now here Orwell is trying to analyze as well as remark on the impressions that he made of Mahatma Gandhi. So he says we do call him, the world calls him a saint, but the judgment has to be done after applying certain concepts, certain parameters on his personality, whether these questions answered have a valid statement to whether he was a saint or not. So he says to give a definite answer, one would have to study Gandhi's acts as well as writings in very, very minute details, because we see Gandhiji's life as a sort of a pilgrimage in which each and every act of his life was significant. So this was how he initiates the essay, but we're not going to take up the entire text, for it is a long one. I'm going to take up the overview as to what irks Orwell or what impresses Orwell about Gandhi. So we see in the very first passage that Gandhi did not make a very good first impression on him. And he says his qualities go unobserved. Gandhi had certain qualities which were not really appreciated. For example, his courage and resolve, which led to his death, his avoidance of the common Indian vice of superstition, his willingness to give everyone he met the benefit of the doubt, his lack of inferiority complex despite his very small stature, because Gandhiji was short statured, as we know, and his interracial friendships amidst racial divisions of South Africa. So we see how he tries to analyze how Gandhi has projected himself as a personality in India as well as outside India. Then Orwell distinguishes between Gandhi's views and those of the Western left wing movement, especially the anarchists and the pacifists. And he also views Gandhi as an anti humanist with a relativist worldview that derives from his religious outlook. Now, this is a debatable point that he makes, because this is his own personal perception that he views Gandhi as an anti humanist. Because of his religious outlook, he feels that Gandhi was not completely honest in religion, or completely, you can say, he was not, he could not validate everything that he said. Then we also say that Gandhi's popularity within the left seems to Orwell to be misguided. He suggests that the left mistakes Gandhi's politics for their own. And the Western anarchists and pacifists celebrate Gandhi as one of their own because of his opposition to colonial regulation and violence, state violence. But what they fail to recognize, he says, is the religious nature of Gandhi's politics. So here he comes to the point that he views that Gandhi is an anti-humanist. He says one cannot subscribe to Gandhi's political ethics without also subscribing to his outlook. And he kind of summarizes it as being one in which human life is devalued in relation to other life, and like as if the whole world is an illusion. So Gandhi's politics, according to Orwell, devalues human life. In order to serve humanity or the world, which he says that Gandhi attempts to do, one must be devoted to the idea that one's own life is worth less than the integrity of the whole. And thus, according to Gandhiji, he says one should be willing to offer it in return for the principle of truth for which they are all fighting. So here, Orwell disagrees with Gandhiji's concept of humanity. Orwell then lists the various ways that Gandhi practiced and professed his devaluation of human life. Now, what this adds up to is a mode of asceticism that Gandhi felt was right for everyone, though he would not impose it on anyone. Now, each individual had to find it within. The only way for this mode of life which Gandhiji advocated to be realized would be if people found it within themselves to practice. So, the essence of Orwell's discussion here is to demonstrate the incompatibility of Gandhiji's beliefs with those of the left. And despite these fundamental differences between Gandhi's mode of politics and that of the Western left, Orwell suggests that there remain certain aspects of Gandhi's pacifism that can in fact be separated out from his religious teachings also. At least Gandhi himself claimed that it was possible that his method could be transferred to different contexts. Whether and how this is possible is ultimately the central and concluding question of this very essay. So here Orwell also suggests that there is something in the concept of Satyagraha which is distinct from pacifism. Now we know that Satyagraha is a very, very popular concept developed and advocated by Gandhiji. And the translation that Orwell finds for Satyagraha is firmness in truth. So he also suggests that there is something in this concept which is different from the Western pacifism, in the sense that though it entailed a commitment to non-violence, yet it was not a passive form of political action, and it was also not about non-participation. On the contrary, in the specific context where Gandhiji developed Satyagraha as a political tool, this particular method actually required a willingness to endure the beatings of the police, the legal threats, the imprisonment, and in fact, threat to every life. So, therefore, Orwell finds this particular interpretation of Satyagraha as firmness in truth. Then, unlike Western pacifists who opposed violence in general, Orwell states that Gandhi took sides. Now, what does he mean by this? Now, according to him, this was necessary due to the national self-determination agenda of Gandhi's struggle. He actually could not in good faith have suggested that both the sides were of equal value. And then he also discusses how or whether Gandhi's method would have held up outside of anti-colonial struggles. Now, in a struggle against this totalitarian regime, Gandhi's method would not have been effective at all. Orwell argues this because he would never have received the kind of media coverage which was necessary to give his agenda the coverage. And so, Gandhi's efforts were entirely dependent on the sensational quality that they carried. In order for them to be publicized and to subsequently mobilize the massive support of the people, Gandhi he depended on a free press. Orwell then asks how many Gandhis there are currently resisting the Soviet Union, and beyond this point, he also questions the place of non-violence in international politics. How would the non-violent appeal be made to a Hitler, for example, he says, or to any other potentially insane head of the state? So while these questions still exist, they are not enough for Orwell to dismiss the principle while he is writing the essay, and stating that another world war could mean the end of civilization. He feels that this discussion of non-violent politics is of utmost urgency. Now, this analysis of Orwell about Gandhi's politics is actually based on Orwell's loose interpretation of Hinduism. And we find that among the important themes of the essay, non-violence in the form of Satyagraha comes out to be the most important theme. Then he's talking about the process of decolonization, the impact of the war, asceticism, totalitarianism, West lefticism, and saintliness. Now, on the whole, to conclude, we find that this essay by Orwell builds up a critique on Gandhi based on certain generalizations about Hinduism as a whole, the religion as a whole, as well as his claim that Gandhi's worldview was definitely Hindu is actually his own personal subjective perspective. Though he begins with the presumption that these principles are Hindu, but these principles are actually central to Gandhi's concept of Satyagraha. So when he connects Gandhi's concepts, his asceticism and his ideology to international politics, he becomes more critical about Gandhi. So this is how we look at Gandhi as a personality, Gandhi as a movement of India, Gandhi as a religion through the eyes of George Orwell in this essay. So this was a brief analysis and overview of the essay Reflections on Gandhi. Thank you for now.